Washington, D.C.
Jobs are up, inflation is down, our border is secure, factories are opening at record levels, investment is booming, Michigan is thriving, America is winning like never before, and again, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
Tonight, 99 days. The midterm countdown is on. President Trump taking his economic message on the road to Michigan today. For Democrats, two Senate candidates battling for the heart of the party. Ahead, my conversation with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries this hour. Also, holding fire. But how long will the pause last between the U.S. and Iran? And our ammunition stockpiles now dictating wartime decisions. And tonight, the war's impact on affordability here at home. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is standing by live to discuss that and an update on Senator Mitch McConnell's health and absence from the U.S. Senate. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lyons is off this evening. We kick off our coverage with the president courting voters in the swing state of Michigan today. He's there right now as the clock ticks down to the midterm elections. Both parties now just 99 days away from an election day that will decide control of Congress through to the end of Trump's second term. And while affordability was a top issue for the president heading into Michigan, still it was Iran that was fresh top of mind for the president when he hit the stage today, confirming reports the administration has paused strikes on Iran in order to restart negotiations. Let's listen.
We have destroyed their Navy. We've destroyed their Air Force. We've destroyed their leadership. We've destroyed their anti-aircraft weaponry. Their drones are being made at a rate of about 7%. We destroyed most of their drone manufacturing capability, their missile manufacturing capability. And right now they're talking to us about making a deal. But if we didn't do it tough, there would be no talk.
In a new poll just released, a super majority, 60% of Americans, say the president makes things with Iran sound, quote, better than they actually are, unquote. For more, we bring in Bloomberg's Jeff Mason, who's live at the White House right now, joining us from a sunny North Lawn. Jeff, it's great to see you. The president trying to seize once again on the issue of affordability, even as the resumption of strikes in Iran have sent gas prices well above $4 a gallon. How does he rationalize these two?
Threading a needle, Joe, and I think he was trying to do that in Michigan today. Certainly interesting that he's there and making his campaign pitch a little bit ahead of the fall season of campaigning that we expect him to launch. As we talked about earlier today, this was kind of the trip that he was expected to have done multiple stops like this spring, and all of that was jettisoned because of the war. So now he's in Michigan making that pitch for his economic record, making other promises about health care and things that he says he will pass in an effort to encourage voters to go out to the polls and vote for Republicans so his party can keep the majorities that they have in the House and in the Senate. But at the same time, rationalizing or explaining the war as something that he has to do and something that was important from a foreign policy perspective, even as it leaves gasoline prices higher, which of course creates political risk for him and for his party.
$4.11 today on average, according to AAA. Jeff, it's going to be a busy day at the White House tomorrow, a busy day for the president. He's got both Benjamin Netanyahu and Volodymyr Zelensky in the building. They're in town for Lindsey Graham's funeral. What could come from those meetings?
Yeah, two really big meetings for him. On the side of Israel, he's meeting with Netanyahu at a time when the two sides don't entirely agree on what's going on with the Iran war. So they'll no doubt discuss the next steps there and express their own opinions on what should happen next. And the president can outline his plan, which he hasn't really outlined for the rest of us, other than to say that for right now, they're pausing the attacks in order for some talks to continue. As far as Zelensky is concerned, also a huge war between Russia and Ukraine that the president initially said he thought he could solve in one day when he got into office a year and a half ago. He's obviously not been able to do that. So talking about next steps there, and no doubt also Zelensky's desire for more U.S. weapons at a time when the U.S. stockpiles are being taxed a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, by the war in Iran.
Really interesting stuff, Jeff, and we'll look forward to your reporting tomorrow. Jeff Mason with us live from the White House. Thank you. Joining us now is Ambassador Bill Taylor, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. He served as the U.S. government representative as well to the Mideast. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you. I'll start with the news from Iran and the pause that refreshes. I just wonder if it refreshes in the form of diplomacy or just an opportunity to rearm.
Probably both sides will want to rearm, but the way out seems to be diplomacy. It doesn't seem like there's much in the winning side of escalation. So if he's not going to escalate, then it's got to be talk.
Well, that's interesting because the reporting that we saw in the Wall Street Journal was that Admiral Bradley Cooper, the top general in the Middle East, was the one to advise the president, suggesting that continued strikes were no longer effective to continue pounding the Strait. Are we out of military options?
We may be out of targets. Maybe that we've hit a lot of targets, and there's no more obvious ones did, but we're also low on munitions.
Okay.
As you mentioned, the Ukrainians were really interested in these Patriots, but there are not many of them left because we've used so many in the Middle East.
So that begs the question, are we in fact making strategic decisions based on our level of munitions, our supply of missiles?
It's probably a factor, Joe. It's probably a factor. It's not the only one.
Yeah.
Again, the trade-off between escalation and diplomacy and negotiations is certainly there. But the munitions is a factor.
What do you make of this idea that we mentioned in this YouGov poll, that Americans believe the president is making this look better than it is, that there's a sales approach here that does not meet reality? At some point, that has a corrosive effect on negotiations, I suspect, as well. What do the Iranians think of that?
Well, the Iranians know what the situation is. They know what the situation is in Iran. They know what their military situation is. They know what the situation is in the Strait and their allies in other straits.
Do they know the score here domestically?
Of course they watch closely. They watch probably your program here, Joe. So they understand very well what the politics are. So it's a trade-off, and you do want to project positive, but you've got to be realistic. You got to tell the truth.
Well, so here we are now in where the world where your two worlds collide. To see Ukraine fire on an Iranian cargo vessel, it was a commercial vessel, to be clear, in the Caspian Sea, raises this to some other level. I'm just wondering what it is. Ukraine, of course, saw an Iranian ship bringing parts to Russia, it believes, components for missiles possibly. But could these two wars somehow combine into one?
Joe, I don't know about combining into one, but they're certainly related and they're certainly interactive. The Russians, as we know, have been providing the Iranians with military intelligence on where U.S. forces are. And the Iranians have used that military intelligence to shoot at U.S. forces. And as we know, kill some.
Yeah.
So it's already that interaction. No, this is an extension of the Ukrainians, what they call the long-range sanctions. They're trying to cut off the supplies for the Russians and also supplies that the Russians send out to sell their oil on the market. So the Ukrainians have been doing this for some time now very effectively, and it continues.
The president was asked about this today. He said he would ask Vladimir Putin about it to see if this was going on. How do you think that conversation is going to work?
So I'm surprised Vladimir Putin hadn't tried to get in touch with President Trump already. Normally what happens when Zelensky is on the docket, is on the agenda, Putin tries to get in
There's
early.
a phone call. There could still be one tonight.
There could be still one tonight, and I hope President Trump says, no thanks.
Interesting.
Call me back later. If you're ready to negotiate. President Trump needs to put the pressure on Putin to negotiate, indeed to stop the war, indeed to go for a ceasefire. And that's what this pressure on Putin is designed for.
So bring me into this meeting tomorrow. We're suddenly now in a space in which Laura Loomer is doing a sit-down with Zelensky, that they'll be meeting the same day as we celebrate the life of Lindsey Graham, one of the great Ukraine war hawks and supporter of this effort. Then he's in the room with Zelensky. What could happen tomorrow?
We could see more support for Ukraine coming out of President Trump. I think while President Trump has been focused on Iran all this time, last couple, 3-4 months, things have been going on in Ukraine, and things have been going on in Ukraine to their benefit, to their credit. The Ukrainians are now on the front foot. They've got the initiative. They're actually winning, Joe. We talked about this before.
Yeah, I got blasted on Twitter when you said that.
I'm sure you did. However, you were right. We were right.
You said it. A lot of people don't believe that, though.
But it is true. It is true.
How does President Trump come to believe that?
Because he's now hearing it from his intelligence forces.
Yeah.
He's seeing it on the ground. He's hearing it from supporters. Senator Graham had a big role as well. He has been strong support. And Senator Graham, as you know, has got 80 co-sponsors for a bill that would put sanctions on the Russians.
I want to hear from you about that, because it looks like this is going to get floor action. The president said he wanted to put Iran and Hezbollah in the bill. It doesn't appear that that's going to happen. Democrats are worried he'll have too much tariff authority out of this. What is the results in the end?
So President Trump has the authority right now to put tariffs on nations that buy Russian oil. But this is just a strong message. This is a very strong message of support in the Senate and in the House and in American people, support for Ukraine and opposition to what Russia is doing.
There's another meeting tomorrow. Benjamin Netanyahu, we're told, has been trying to get this meeting for 3 months. Lo and behold, he's going to a funeral in town, and he's going to be with the president. Will cameras be invited inside, do we think? And what type of collaboration could we witness? The president said today out loud on Air Force One that we do not agree on everything when it comes to Iran.
We don't agree on everything, and Prime Minister Netanyahu had some role in convincing President Trump to start this war. President Trump probably remembers that.
Is there some buyer's remorse there?
There's some buyer's remorse.
How does that meeting progress then? What's the ask from Netanyahu?
Netanyahu apparently wants the war to continue.
Okay.
And
go back to shooting.
Back to shooting. Back to the bad advice, frankly, that Netanyahu has been giving Trump. He's going to continue to give that bad advice. President Trump is likely to say no.
You might have seen his Truth Social feed through the day yesterday while we're talking about diplomacy. He was posting memes of himself, AI images. In one case, he was on an oil tanker with soldiers behind him. He was on Karg Island. We're bombing Karg Island on another one. Those options keep coming up again. What happens if we occupy Karg Island or bomb Pickaxe Mountain? Is that an escalation that changes the contours of this war?
Well, those are two different, Joe.
Understood.
But putting soldiers on the ground
for that's serious. You can take that one along.
That is serious, and that will be hard for us. That'll be expensive. I mean, they'll succeed. There's no doubt they'll succeed.
Also send the price of oil ever higher?
Send the price of oil up.
So maybe that's not an escalation.
I think President Trump would not like to do that.
Yeah.
He's avoided that. He's got this pause going on right now in order to give diplomacy some chance. But that's not what the Prime Minister's after.
You might drop something on Pickaxe Mountain, however, where they reportedly have centrifuges under hundreds of feet of rock. Would that be?
President Trump has said over and over, no nuclear weapon for Iran. This is another step in that direction.
Okay. It's great to have you back with us.
Joe, thanks.
We're never going to finish talking about either of these, I think, but as long as these two conflicts are underway, we appreciate your insights and your experience very much, Ambassador.
Thank you, Joe.
It's Bill Taylor with us live on Bloomberg. Oil prices, of course, in the news here, we've mentioned them already, pulled back on the news of potential negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. News the president confirmed aboard Air Force One just a few hours ago. But it's big tech earnings the market is also looking forward to this week. And we turn to power moves now with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, live from world headquarters in New York. Hey, Nora.
Hey, Joe. Well, looking at the market, we did see oil markets falling as we saw prices coming down just a bit. Brent crude lower by about 10%, right about 8.7%. Excuse me. We are seeing that lower. Of course, this is still well below that peak that we saw of $118 a barrel just months ago. But we're still seeing the market really trying to price in the effects of this war. The market removing some of that geopolitical risk premium, but traders not necessarily pricing in the end of the war, but potentially a lower probability of a major supply disruption. If you take a look at the equity market, we did see stocks surging to start the session today, but losing some steam throughout the trading day. We saw the S&P 500 ending just above flat, but if you dig a bit deeper into under the hood, we saw about more than 300 stocks to the upside. Where we did see some weakness was within the tech space, so that weighing on the NASDAQ 100 index. We saw the NASDAQ falling by about 0.3%, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which we we know tends to hold a lot of those blue chip companies, up by about 0.5%. And sticking with some of those individual tech movers that we were talking about, we saw NVIDIA and AMD being some of the biggest weights on these major indexes. Energy, the worst performing group, in line with the moves that we were seeing over there in energy.
Yeah, tough day for NVIDIA, Nora, down 5%. That hurts. And I'm wondering what we are planning to learn later this week. We've got 4 of the Mag 7 reporting, and it's probably going to spill over into the rest of the AI space. What are you looking for the next 3 days?
Well, the conversation is essentially going to be about whether or not these companies are spending way too much money on the AI build out, and whether or not the fundamentals, the metrics that we're getting out of these earnings reports this week will actually support the idea that these companies are able to keep up with the pace of spending that they're doing. So there'll be a lot of scrutiny. There'll be a high bar. That's what I'm hearing from analysts on Wall Street as to which companies are able to actually show that they have that return on investment, and which companies potentially are making bigger promises that they can actually meet.
Got it, Nora. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda looking ahead to some important earnings from the likes of Meta, Apple, Amazon. We'll be following them all coming off of Alphabet's earnings last week that gave us a few extra things to consider. We'll now be going into the heart of earnings reporting season with the AI spend, of course, being a huge part of it. Coming up on Balance of Power, with less than 99 days to go until the midterms, we're almost there to tomorrow yet. We'll have a good conversation for you coming up next with the man who could be Speaker, Democratic leader in the House, the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, joining us from New York to talk about the dueling narratives over the affordability conversation leading to November, and dueling narratives inside the Democratic Party on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. A new poll out tonight shows just how the state of the economy is impacting Americans nationwide, with 75% telling YouGov their income is not keeping up with inflation. I had a chance to speak today with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about the issue of affordability, how it plays into the midterm elections. Started asking him about steps Democrats have taken to lower prices. Listen.
Well, we're going to continue to aggressively push the effort to push back against this reckless war of choice. It's deeply unpopular with the American people, and we have to sustain the intensity. Donald Trump has unfortunately got us involved in this situation without any plan, any objective, any clear exit strategy, and now the American people are clearly paying the price. One of the things we have to take a look at is the amount of taxpayer dollars that are being spent to fund Donald Trump's reckless war machine and effort in the Middle East. It's clear to us that the American people would much rather their taxpayer dollars being spent to make their life more affordable. That's why we're committed to lowering the cost of groceries, lowering the cost of gas, lowering the cost of housing, and making sure that healthcare is affordable for every single American.
How do you lower the cost of gas without ending the war, though? We're at $4.11. Mr. Leader, it's been suggested even by the president we eliminate the federal gas tax. Is that something that you would support?
The most significant thing that can be done right now to lower the price of gas for everyday Americans who are suffocating at the pump is to end Donald Trump's reckless war of choice in the Middle East. And we're going to continue to relentlessly make the case that that needs to happen.
Where are you on the gas tax, then? Is that something that should be removed, at least temporarily?
Well, the gas tax, of course, is something that's in place to help fund our desperately needed infrastructure on highways and beyond. Yeah. And so I think, it's something that the Republicans put it on the table. We'll have to evaluate it. But clearly the most significant thing that could be done at this moment, as opposed to a temporary measure, is to end the war in Iran.
We start talking about affordability. Mr. Leader, it creeps into all kinds of other stories, including now data centers, which have become a massive political issue. And we've been struck by how often it comes up when we talk to voters around the country. And of course, the state of New York, where you're right now sitting, has become an important guidepost here, at least for some who believe that there should be restrictions on data centers. As you well know, the governor has put a one-year moratorium on new data centers in the state. There are a lot of different ways to get to this. We spoke with Byron Donalds the other day, the Republican from Florida, who has a bill that wouldn't put on a moratorium, but would take data centers off the grid and would compel them to have their own water supply. How do you get to this in a way that makes voters happy?
Well, House Democrats have launched a commission on artificial intelligence and the innovation economy to thoughtfully engage with community-based organizations and groups, advocacy organizations, as well as industry stakeholders to try to evaluate the best possible path forward. But what is clear is that we have to put at the center of any effort making sure we're not doing anything to exacerbate the affordability crisis that everyday Americans are experiencing in every area of life. And that, of course, includes figuring out how to drive down utility costs and the cost of water, for instance, bills, as opposed to, increasing the strain on the system in ways that would actually drive up costs. And so I think this has been a state-by-state effort up until this point, with states landing in a variety of different places in terms of approach. I do think in the new Congress, we're going to have to come together and think about how we can address many of these issues nationally.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to ask you about some of the strokes behind this midterm cycle, which is what we're talking about with 99 days to go. And I can't walk into a room in Washington without hearing about the Save America Act. That's, of course, because of the amount of attention the president has paid to it. Leader Jeffries, were Republicans successful in salvaging this? Will it cost Democrats votes if it becomes law? Where are you on this? Have you talked to John Thune about it?
I haven't talked to John Thune, but he's made clear repeatedly that the so-called Save America Act, which is really all about voter suppression, is actually dead on arrival in the Senate. And
there you have it from Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, of course, talking with us a little bit earlier today. He's on recess along with his colleagues and members from, the Democratic conference as well as the Republican conference. The Senate is still in town, though, and they're going to be dealing with a number of issues as they keep their eye on the ball here that were already an issue in the House last week, a continuing resolution to fund the government before a potential outage on September 30th, along with reconciliation, which is something else that we talk about. If you'd like to find our full interview with Hakeem Jeffries, you can find it online or on the terminal, as he talked about the way forward with a Republican-led effort in Reconciliation 3.0 to fund the Pentagon, among other issues. Of course, affordability was the reason why we were talking today. That's why the president was in Michigan, for instance, why Hakeem Jeffries was in Pennsylvania yesterday on the stump with a number of folks, including Josh Shapiro. And we're going to continue that conversation on what is the preeminent issue driving voters in this election, affordability, with a new development as well on the health of Senator Mitch McConnell. We're going to talk about that and more of the messaging from both sides of the aisle today when we spend time with Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. He's going to be with us next on Balance of Power with the push and pull on affordability from Democrats and Republicans. 99 days to the midterm elections, and we're glad you're with us on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Jobs are up, inflation is down, our border is secure, factories are opening at record levels, investment is booming, Michigan is thriving, America is winning like never before, and again, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. President Trump there speaking before a crowded Michigan. He left the bubble to visit the swing state and touched on everything from Iran to oil prices to, of course, the upcoming midterm elections. That's why he was there, making his way to Michigan as the Senate primary gets set to take place there in just a little over a week. The Senate, meantime, on its final sprint to the August recess with several must-pass bills on its agenda. As one of its key members, Senator Mitch McConnell, of course, remains hospitalized. McConnell's team revealing tonight the senator is not yet medically cleared to return to the Senate following polio complications. For more on this and the affordability arguments leading into this midterm cycle, we turn to Kentucky Democratic Governor Andy Beshear. Governor, it's great to see you. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to have you. I know you sent a letter to Mitch McConnell and to his office. Absolutely. Dated July 8th. I have it right here, requesting an update on his health and well-being. As you write, Kentuckians have grown increasingly concerned about the current state of your health and ability to hold office in the United States Senate. His press team today out with a statement that says, I'm still working hard to get back to my full schedule of work and keeping up with the intense physical therapy per my doctor's orders. Unfortunately, that means I won't be able to make it to Fancy Farm, Kentucky this Saturday. Is that good enough?
No, it's not. Mitch McConnell owes the people of Kentucky, who are his boss, who have elected him repeatedly, a lot more transparency than this. All we've gotten are 2 photos and statements that virtually anybody could put out there. I mean, he's had a 17-minute conversation with his protege, Scott Jennings, but he can't call in for 3 minutes to Bloomberg or anywhere else just so we know he still has the capacity. So I sent another letter today demanding that he provide verbal proof that he has the capacity to continue. But I also sent one to John Thune, because as now the majority leader in the Senate, he has a duty, too, to make sure that all of their members have the capacity and can represent the people of their states. And what I told Leader Thune is there are only 3 ways for a vacancy, to my knowledge, to happen: a resignation, a death, or a vote of expulsion, a vote that there is not capacity from the Senate itself. If Mitch McConnell won't level with the people of Kentucky and the United States, Senator Thune has a duty to do so.
Well, he's missed 38 Senate votes, having been admitted to the hospital on June 14th. Some of them were pretty important votes, Governor, including funding the Pentagon and our government. How many more votes should he be allowed to miss before something is done here?
Well, I think that the Senate needs to take some form of action, and that can be in simply providing the type of evidence that people deserve, that he still has the capacity. You know, if anybody watching this missed 45 days of their job, they would be expected to call their boss, explain why they've been out and what their prognosis is to return, and to do it themselves verbally to that boss. That's all we're asking. The boss here are the people of Kentucky. And I get we're all entitled to some level of privacy of our health. But when you run for office, you give some of that up. That's the deal. And that's what we know going into it.
Well, do I understand it correctly that August 3rd is a key deadline here, that if Mitch McConnell continues in this capacity through the 3rd, then you will not have an opportunity to name a replacement until the actual election is held? Is that right?
There's an argument out there that's a date where I could not later call a special election. And for those that are really pushing this, well, a lot of those that are pushing this are online and I think are under the impression that a Democrat in Kentucky might be able to win that election. It's been since 1992 that we have had a Democratic senator in Kentucky. You mentioned a lot of missed votes. I want to point out some other missed votes that might not be a bad thing. He hasn't been there to vote on the SAVE Act, which would tear voting rights away. He hasn't been there to vote to support this war in Iran that this president started and shouldn't be continuing. He's not there to vote for a potential replacement of a Supreme Court justice to continue a court that would tear down the Voting Rights Act. So listen, when you look at some of this, a vacancy, not having Mitch McConnell show up isn't necessarily a bad thing, because he certainly doesn't show up to help the American people.
Wow. Strong words from the governor. And I have to ask you, I think I know the answer, but have you talked to him? When's the last time you got on the phone?
I have not. We have asked this time, if he is not going to respond, for his staff to step up and to be honest and transparent. And Joe, I hope in all this, right, because I don't wish him ill. I've known members of his family. We have always been polite to each other. I hope he can just provide, whether it's video or other proof, and we can move on, and all this speculation can end, and we ultimately know when he'll be back voting in the Senate. But we're all expected to be in a position to do our job, and it's not asking a lot for proof of it.
Well, this is awkward. Have you talked to Elaine Chao before I move on to something else? Has anyone in the family reached out?
I have not.
Okay. You mentioned the war in Iran, which you clearly do not approve of. And now that fighting has resumed, of course, we've got a pause underway right now, but the most recent spat of 13 straight nights of strikes sent oil prices back up and got gas prices back above $4 a gallon nationally. The president is in Michigan today to talk about affordability, Governor. And it's interesting, the Democrats are talking about the very same thing, just like the election a couple of years ago. This is what people will frame their decisions on based on the messaging coming from both parties. How do you answer the president of the United States when he says affordability is a Democrat hoax?
Yeah, the president is lying, but gas prices don't. And it's not just gas prices. Look at the price of diesel, because that hits my state that much more. All of our farm machinery runs on diesel, and it's up several dollars to where it was just a year or two ago. People ask me
we're at $5.29 today.
Yeah, people ask me how this war and Donald Trump's leadership is hitting people in Kentucky. Let me give you the example of a soybean farmer. When Donald Trump ended U.S. aid, that was a major source of purchasing for our soybean farmers, because ultimately helping countries not have their people go hungry is a way of spreading soft power and making groups like the United States. Then through the U.S. Department of Education, they cut the farm to cafeteria program, which was simply feeding our kids through our farmers. Then Donald Trump decided he would tariff China, which stopped buying our soybeans. They are the largest purchaser in the world. They went to Argentina and Brazil, and while some of that has come back down, that full purchase will never be there. If that wasn't enough, now the war in Iran has skyrocketed the price of diesel, and people are paying that much more to harvest. And if that wasn't hurtful enough, about a third of the world's fertilizer comes through, you guessed it, the Strait of Hormuz. That is how badly Donald Trump's actions and his alone are hitting just one group of Kentuckians.
Well, look, I'm sure you're building quite a story to tell here in this midterm cycle. And I have a lot of questions for you about that, whether it's the impact of tariffs on farmers or the fact that the president had to come up with billions of dollars to help farmers in what will be this reconciliation 3.0. I'm just curious your thoughts on a couple of other items, though, in this campaign when we consider affordability and the prices that we're all paying here, the impact, Governor, on Kentucky and what it will mean getting on the campaign trail here moving forward. Do you plan to talk more about specifically how this has impacted farmers in your state?
Absolutely. I think affordability, it will be the driving issue, though I worry a little bit that just calling it affordability is political sciencing people's real pain. It's that you can't afford a house right now until you're 40 years old. And how much do you feel raising a family knowing that your parents own that house? It's not being able to take your kids on the same vacation that your parents took you on. It's working hard and playing by the rules, but feeling like you're not getting ahead. And that makes people feel like the system is rigged. It makes them feel like they're a failure. And the moment that people feel like
is that why we're seeing democratic socialists emerge on the campaign trail? And I don't mean to be political sciencing myself, but this has become a big argument too, Governor. Are they part of the recipe for success for Democrats in this midterm, or a distraction?
I don't agree with everything some of those candidates are talking about, but what they are doing is directly talking to people's pain. They are directly talking to the fact that folks are working hard but can't pay for their groceries, are worried about going to the doctor, might not be able to pay their pharmaceuticals. They're scared the next bill for utilities will put them over the edge. People aren't just living paycheck to paycheck. They're living bill to bill. And again, when you start starting to believe that the American dream is no longer possible, that it's just a hallucination, then you'll vote for people that you believe can burn down the system or at least will do something dramatic. I believe that Democrats need to be that party of the American dream, but I want to support candidates that have real solutions that will work, that will deliver in the short term, that will lead to a better United States of America.
All right, Andy Beshear, Governor, who do you hope you run against in 2028?
That's a good way to phrase that question. No one's asked it that way. I haven't made any final decision, and part of it's I'm head of the Democratic Governors Association. I've got a job to do.
Yes, sir.
We're going to elect governors in places that people aren't expecting. But let me say this. The map for 2028 is going to be made not through congressional, but through governor's races in 2026. When Rob Sand flips Iowa, Iowa's in play in 28. When Amy Acton flips Ohio, Ohio's in play in 2028. Katie Hobbs has to win re-election in Arizona because she's running against an election denier, and there wouldn't be full and fair elections if she doesn't win. So I want to make sure I do my job coming up to November. So whoever the Democratic candidate is has a map that we can and will win with.
Very effective answer, Governor. Come back and see us. I'm glad we've started our conversation, and I hope we continue it with you. Governor Andy Beshear, thank you so much for the time today on Bloomberg. Coming up, we're going to go to Capitol Hill, where senators are in a final sprint before August recess. Will they have any wins to show for it? This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. You know what they say here inside the Beltway, there's no greater motivator on Capitol Hill than the smell of jet fumes. You do hear that a lot. That motivation is hitting lawmakers in the Senate tonight, well, maybe in the next couple of days. As the rush to recess gets underway, this is the final sprint before the August recess, and lawmakers in the upper chamber are facing a packed agenda, a feed bag of legislation ticking down to their break. But will they have anything to show for it by this time next week? Joining us now is Bloomberg's Erik Wasson, who is live on Capitol Hill. Erik, we know that John Thune sees the sequencing a little bit different here than the Speaker of the House. Will we see a vote on a continuing resolution to fund the government? Will we get to reconciliation? What's in store?
You know, I think the CR, the stopgap spending bill to fund the government after October 30th is looking better. Thune was just telling us that that's looking on track. So I'm expecting some kind of work on that before the end of next week when they go out for recess. But there's a big battle brewing between John Thune and the President of the United States, with the President, although he's saying he has a personal good relationship with Thune, really calling on him to keep the Senate in session throughout August to pass the Save America Act. Thune just telling us that there's not the votes for that. And unless Trump can personally, lobby senators to get the 60 votes necessary, he just doesn't see the futility of staying until August. So there's a big dispute about the calendar going on, about the agenda. We're also looking at this crypto bill, the Clarity Act, that came out in draft form last week, lacking certain ethics proposals that the Democrats want. Certainly the crypto industry is very eager for a vote before August goes out, but the banks have problems with this bill as well, and stablecoin and the way that that's handled. So we're looking very closely at whether that's going to get a vote. That seems perhaps in doubt as well. So it's a bit in flux right now, and certainly over the next 24 hours, we expect Republicans to sort of huddle among themselves and come up with a plan for these 2 weeks and see whether they're going to stay in through part of their precious August recess.
I'm glad you mentioned the Clarity Act. This is the crypto market structure bill, Erik, because I can't count how many times we've heard there was a deal on either end of this, the ethics side, the stablecoin yield. Here we are again doubting its passage. John Thune may force a procedural vote at some point, it's believed, to figure out where people stand on this or have some sort of conclusion. Is that what happens? Because we keep hearing it could be dead.
there could be a procedural vote. There's certainly a push by the crypto lobby to have a vote so that they can go and pressure Democrats ahead of the election. So I think, there's certainly again, how does influence work in this town, a big push to have that vote. But again, the days are ticking down here. We're also looking at potentially a deal on Todd Blanche, the AG, acting AG. We were just talking to John Cornyn, and he's pressuring, the administration to change this settlement, which gives the president IRS immunity. That's a tough order there as well. We're seeing a vote on the Clayton nomination. I'm expecting that to go through. This is to be the top spy. So the Senate is just processing a lot of controversy here and trying to do a lot of work with the administration behind the scenes, even as the president's in extraordinary fashion in the White House sort of putting pressure on John Thune to obey his wishes.
Well, that Clayton vote is going to be fascinating. Erik will be curious to hear what happens. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson starting the week for us live on Capitol Hill. As we bring in our political panel, Democratic strategist Jeannie Shanzano is with us, our Bloomberg politics contributor in studio, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, joined by Leslie Shedd, founder of Rising Communications, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ladies, it's great to have you both. Thank you so much for being with us. Jeannie, it's not often we get to compare notes in the same room, and I'm deeply curious your thoughts on this affordability conversation that we've been having kind of throughout the program. We started with Hakeem Jeffries, Andy Beshear. Now I'd like to hear from you, because the president's been speaking in Michigan about this on a day when gasoline averages $4.11. We're starting to get back up there, realizing that oil itself was a bit lower today with the pause. This will be the deciding issue in this campaign. Both parties are talking about the same thing all over again.
They are. And of course, the president in Michigan, where unemployment is amongst the highest in the nation, 5%. They've lost 3,000 jobs in the auto industry since he came back into office. He has the bridge opening today. And of course, because of his relationship with Canada and the tariff issue, that has not gone smoothly. So he's got a lot of work to do. And this is, of course, I heard your great conversation with Hakeem Jeffries. He mentioned the fact that Donald Trump spoke favorably about inflation. He calls affordability a Democratic hoax. That is the messaging that is riling up Republicans, because it is not a hoax. This is the thing that most, not just Democrats, Republicans, Americans are concerned about. Sure. And I would just point to the CBS YouGov poll over the weekend. 6 out of 10 Americans saying the economy has gotten worse and is going to get worse under Donald Trump. Those are astonishing numbers. And 1/5 of Republicans saying they may vote Democrat or stay home. Those are bad numbers for this White House and for Republicans. So they've got to get their message straight. And I didn't hear everything he's saying in Michigan today, but I did hear a lot of communist, socialist, pinko, Red Scare kind of talk, which is not at all helpful when you're talking about affordability.
Well, it is interesting. We did mention that YouGov poll a little earlier in the hour, and it's something, obviously, with 100 days or 99 days out to pay attention to. So the president has a couple of options here, and we hear Joe Biden's name a lot, right? This is Joe Biden's inflation. We need more time to fix it. Is that good enough, I guess, is the question, or does the president need to wind down the war before the midterms?
Well, getting back really quick to the socialist and communist stuff, look, okay. I do want to say, I think it's important. He is talking about affordability when he's talking about that. People let's take in Maine, for example, right? The new Senate candidate in Maine for the Democrats, he supports free college for everybody. He wants to get rid of private health insurance and do Medicare for all. All of these social welfare programs, especially that these DSA candidates are supporting, we're talking about $100 to $150 trillion. That is something that is going to hit the pocketbooks of every single person in higher taxes, higher regulations. So he is talking about affordability. He's just talking about it from that specific stance.
Okay, interesting. But it's also it's the prices that are creating the populism that are leading to a candidate like that to begin with, isn't it?
And we've got to get gas prices down. I 100% agree with that. That will be a huge problem. I do think, however, he is working to try to get that down. You see the president, he is trying to open up the SPR more. more. He is working to try to get the Strait of Hormuz opened again. He understands that that is critical. But at the same time, it's similar to the argument of China, right? Which is we can't just allow China to fill the United States up with cheap Chinese-made goods at the expense of American manufacturing. And we can't threaten U.S. national security over gas right now. It's a tough decision that a commander-in-chief has to make. We elect them to make that tough decision. And it's hard on him, but I think that's why he's out there trying to sell it and remind people why we are where we are.
Well, and as you saw, with George H.W. Bush, a lot of times you can have a groundswell of support behind that military mission. And when the economy flops, people forget real fast. Is there a lesson for Donald Trump to be learned there?
Absolutely. And of course, a big distinction there is that you're hard-pressed to find anybody, even in the administration, who can tell us why there was an imminent threat on February 27th that led to this attack on February 28th. In fact, when we attacked and when Donald Trump led the attack in Iran last year, he told us he had obliterated their nuclear weapons, their nuclear power. There was absolutely no explanation from this White House as to what the imminent threat was. And that's a big distinction. I was not a big supporter of George Bush either. But what did the Bush administration do? They made a case to the American public. They got allies. We are doing this all on our own. Because why? Because the president has thumbed his nose at all the allies. And I just want to go back to costs for a minute. I don't think the White House is as concerned about spending because they're going to Congress and asking for $1.5 trillion for military and defense spending for next year. That is historic across human history. That money could well be invested. I agree with free college. I agree with spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and health care. Let's put that $1.5 trillion there and not in defense, particularly at a time when they're asking for almost $70 million more to fight a war, and we're not even winning against Iran. Why are we going to spend $1.5 trillion more when we can't even beat Iran? So all of this adds up to a president and an administration that ran against these kinds of wars, has gotten us into them, and has no answer for how to make our lives cost effective. And that's what he promised to do.
Of course, tomorrow it's going to be a room full of some of the biggest military hawks, remembering Lindsey Graham, who you worked for.
Yes.
We've got funeral services here tomorrow on the same day the president is in the room at the White House with Volodymyr Zelensky. As we consider our support for Ukraine, what could happen? What could take place in these meetings tomorrow?
Well, I think we all know anything could happen in a meeting with President Trump,
when you're coming out of that service, though, I guess it's before the funeral, in fact, but that's all anyone's going to be thinking about tomorrow, right? Do it for Lindsey.
Do it for Lindsey. And I think, too, look, the president likes having winners. He likes to have a winner. He's a businessman. He looks at these things and thinks, can we win? Can these people win? And he sees that now. I was just in Ukraine earlier this month, right about the same time that Senator Graham was there. And it was palpable. Everywhere that we went, you could tell people knew they were winning. They felt just elation about it, and they were really excited at the time, I think, for the Patriot licensing agreement. Right now, what Ukraine really needs from the United States and from Europe, they need Patriot interceptors, and they need for us to continue to send them the intelligence that we have been sending them. That has been really helpful in them, especially in some of these long-range strikes that they're making inside of Russia.
I'll be deeply curious to see if cameras are in the room for that meeting and for the meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow. They will both be in town, along with our great panelists, Jeannie Shanzano and Leslie Shedd. Thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your insights. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter before we meet here tomorrow. Kaylee will be back on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.